We are in downtown Los Angeles, outside the Los Angeles Times building, where the book festival is going on, joined by the famous best-selling author Reza Aslan, author of No God But God, How to Win a Cosmic War, and a new collection, in fact, of Islamic poetry. Reza, you are obviously a keen observer of the Middle East. Why don't you tell us your views on what's happening right now? Has the situation stagnated, or are we going to see a second momentum to the revolution?
I think honestly, it depends on what happens in Syria. No one could have imagined that here we are, in the middle of the end of April, and we have over 500 people dead in Syria, that the protests just keep getting larger. They are beginning to sweep up more and more of the Syrian public. Dozens of members of the Ba'ath Party in Syria have resigned. A number of MPs have stepped down. Now, we're a long ways away from seeing a kind of Egyptian-style uprising in Syria, make no mistake. But we don't need to see that kind of uprising to see the ripples that that's going to have across the Middle East. In some ways, Syria is a far more integral linchpin in that region than even Egypt is. Syria, of course, very warm relations with Iran, a buffer in Lebanon with Hezbollah, still an enemy, an avowed enemy of Israel. So a lot of different interests at stake with Syria, and how Syria goes, I think, is going to define the next level in this so-called Arab Spring.
What should we read into the Egyptian-Iranian rapprochement and then the Egyptian-Syrian back-channel diplomacy around the Palestinian unity that's just been forged?
I don't think that there's going to be any surprise about how Egypt is going to conduct itself post-Mubarak. Let's be very clear. Egypt wants to be the Turkey of North Africa. It doesn't care about its previous alliances. What it cares about now is maintaining not just its economic stability, but it wants to begin to exert itself into the region in a way that it couldn't under the Mubarak regime. It wants to have rapprochement with Iran. It wants to have greater relations with Syria, not because it is going into their camp, not because it's turning its back on Europe or North America, but because it sees that model of the sort of mediator protecting its economic interests that has made Turkey so successful. Its economy is booming still. I think it's the third fastest growing GDP in the world right now, and it wants precisely that Turkish model. So I think that Egypt is thinking about Egypt and nothing else.
Now, a lot of people underestimate Saudi Arabia because they either just don't understand it or they don't like it. But the fact is that Saudi Arabia represents almost 50% of the entire Arab world's economy. How is Saudi Arabia looking at what's happening around the region, and what is its role going to be as a regional leader?
I mean, there's no surprise in this. Saudi Arabia is trembling. I mean, it's scared to death. Not because it feels as though that kind of Arab uprising that it's seen across the region will somehow make its way to Saudi Arabia. That is not going to happen. But because it understands that its influence in the region is being dramatically reduced as a result of these uprisings. It was a remarkable thing for the Saudis to actually send troops into neighboring Bahrain in order to bring down that protest. The only reason that it would risk such a profoundly provocative step is because it actually believes that its own stability is at stake because of what's going on in its neighborhood.
But yet you don't see a revolutionary scenario for Saudi Arabia.
There's no possibility of it. I mean, it's a very simple thing. These revolutions are ultimately based on economic degradation. Yes, of course, people want political participation. Of course, they want human rights and all those things. But ultimately, at the foundation of these movements, it's an issue of the economy. And Saudi Arabia, I mean, it's not really even a nation. It's really the wholly owned subsidiary of a single clan. And because the chasm between the rich and the poor tends to also be paralleled by the chasm between Saudi citizens and non-Saudi citizens, it's really unlikely that those citizens are going to be at the forefront of a democratic wave for economic liberalization. Ain't gonna happen.
Reza Aslan, thanks for deciphering these interesting and exciting times for us here on foreignpolicy.com.
My pleasure.